Owls in the Family, Chapter 5, Part 1. I like this picture of the owl. He looks fierce. All right, last time I asked you an inferring question. Georgie Barnes, he changes from hurting to helping the owl. Now, this is a big change. He goes from bully to rescuer. And the big question is why? So I told you to think about what you know because the answer is not in the book. It doesn't say Georgie Barnes changed his mind because. It doesn't explain it to us. So we have to infer why he might have done that. So I told you to think about what do you know about kids? Well, kids try out new things all the time. So kids try out, so he might have been trying out being mean to an animal. Maybe he had not done that before, and maybe he had never helped an owl before. So he tries new things. Boys, what do we know about the boys in this book? They sure do like to hunt and take animals. So Georgie Barnes obviously didn't feel very bad at all about taking this wild animal. They love to do adventures, and certainly everything new to them is a big adventure. So maybe helping the owl was a big adventure for Georgie. Maybe he'd never done that before. What do we know about bullies? Well, often bullies are very hurt people, and they feel hurt on the inside, and so they protect themselves by acting super mean on the outside. So Georgie Barnes was being a bully to the owl, but maybe there's a part of him that could see that the owl was hurt, and maybe he understood that a little bit. We don't know. And what do we know about groups of people or groups of kids? Well, we know about something called peer pressure. I don't know if you have heard about that, boys and girls, but it basically means that when you're with a group of your peers are people your own age, you can feel pressured to do the things that they are doing. And this is especially so for teenagers. Teenagers feel a lot of peer pressure. If their friends are doing something, they really feel that they should be doing that too. They hate to be different. So maybe Georgie Barnes, when he was with the other boy, felt like, well, he should be doing what that other boy was doing and hurting the owl. And then when Billy came along, maybe he felt like he should have been helping the owl. So who knows? But those are all things that could be. And you guys gave a lot of really good, hard thinking, inferring answers. So well done. Chapter 5. Though there were only a few more weeks left of school before the summer holidays began, each day seemed 100 years long. I could hear the river boiling over the sandbars as I sat at my desk, and I could smell the sticky, sweet smell of the young poplar leaves. Our school stood right beside the river, and every now and then a flock of ducks would go over the playground, quack, quack, quacking, as if they were laughing at us for being stuck inside, while they were flying free across the wide prairie. What made it even worse for me was just sitting there wondering what my owls were doing. After school, I would jump on my bike and pedal like 40 over the bridge and down our street. When I got close to home, I would give a couple of owl whoops to let Wool and Weeps know I was coming. By the time I skidded into the yard and parked my bike, they would be tramping impatiently up and down the cage. As soon as the door was open, they would come out, waddling out as fast as they could, ready for play. Wool liked to scramble up on the back of an old lawn chair. Then he would take a wild leap and try to land on my shoulder. If he missed, he would nosedive into the lawn, but it never bothered him much. He would hop back to the chair, climb up, and try again until finally he made my shoulder. Weeps was different. He never believed he could do anything by himself. And so he would just sit on the lawn and whimper until I picked him up and put him on my other shoulder. I think Weep's spirit must have been broken in the oil drum, because as long as I knew him, he was always afraid of doing things. With both owls riding on my shoulders, I used to go down the street to where our gang played games in an empty lot. Can the Can was a favorite game that spring, sort of a combination of baseball and football. We used an inflated rubber beach ball that belonged to Murray, and when all the kids got chasing it, Wool would get so excited he would join in too. One time he got in the way of the ball when someone kicked it, and it knocked the wind clean out of him. The next time the ball came near him, he made a jump and got hold of it with both sets of claws. There was a hissing noise and the ball went limp. Wool was pleased as punch, but we weren't, because it was the only ball we had. Boys and girls, I don't know if you can visualize an owl in the middle of a game with a ball. Seems ridiculous. Of all the kids except Bruce and Murray were a bit scared of the owls. So when I had them on my shoulders, I could go anywhere in Saskatoon and be safe as houses. Even the tough kids down by the flour mill kept their distance when I had the owls with me. Those owls were better bodyguards than tigers. Wool and Weeps grew fast. Weeps would eat anything he could get and still be hungry, but Wool was fussy about his food. At first, Wool would only eat cooked butcher's meat, hard-boiled eggs, and fig cookies. Later on, he would eat anything that came from our table, even vegetables, all except parsnips, which he hated. Occasionally, both owls would eat a dead gopher that some kid had shot or snared as a present for them, but they didn't really like their supper raw. By the middle of June, when they were 3 months old, my new pets had reached full size. Wool was a little bigger than Weeps and stood about 2 feet high, but his wing spread was nearly 5 feet across. So boys and girls, if I laid down on the floor and you put Wool's wings beside me, so here's poor Mrs. Ratzlaff on the floor. Terrible drawing, I know. And then we have Wool. There's the owl with the owl wings. His wings would be almost as far apart as I am on the floor there. The claws of both were about 1 inch long and as sharp as needles, and their big hooked beaks looked strong enough to open a tin can. Weeps was a normal owl color, sort of a mottled brown, but Wool stayed almost pure white, with a few black markings on his feathers. At night, he looked like a ghost, and we talked about that before. Although they were grown up now, neither of the animals seemed to know what his wings were for. Because they saw us walking around, they seemed to think they had to walk around too. And remember, we were talking about imprinting? Maybe if I had been able to fly, they would have learned to fly a lot sooner. But the way things were, both owls tried to do what we kids did. They saw us climbing trees, and so they took to climbing trees. It was pretty silly to watch Wool climbing. He used to really climb. First, he'd jump up to a low branch, and then he'd use his beak and his claws to half lift himself and half shinny to the next branch. My pigeons used to circle around sometimes and watch him. They must have thought he was crazy. People sometimes thought so too. One day, Wool was climbing a poplar in our front yard when a man and a woman stopped on the sidewalk and watched him with their mouths open. Finally, the man said to me, "What on earth's the matter with that bird? Why doesn't he fly to the top of the tree?" "He can't fly, sir," I replied. "He never learned how." The man looked at me as if I were crazy too and walked off without another word. The day Wool actually learned to fly was one I'll remember for a long time. He had climbed a cottonwood in the backyard and had got way out on a thin little branch and couldn't get back. You never saw an owl look so unhappy. He kept teetering up and down on the end of the branch and hooing at me to come and get him out of his fix. Dad and Mother came out to see what was going on, and they started to laugh, because whoever heard of a bird that couldn't get itself down out of a tree? But when people laughed at Wool, it hurt his feelings and upset him. What with the laughter and the fact that it was supper time and he was hungry, Wool got careless. Finally, he teetered a little too far forward and lost his balance. "Hoo, hoo!" he shrieked as he bounced through the branches toward the ground. Then, all of a sudden, he spread his wings, and the next thing any of us knew, he was flying. Well, sort of flying. Not having done it before, he didn't really know what he was doing, even then. You could tell he was just as surprised as we were. He came swooshing out of the tree like a rocket, and he seemed to be heading straight for me. But I ducked, and he pulled up and went shooting back into the air again. He was still hoo-hooing like mad when he stalled and slid back downward tail first and hit the ground with an awful thump. By that time, I was laughing so hard I had to lie on the grass and hold my stomach. When I looked up at last, it was to see Wool stomping into his cage. He was furious with all of us, and I couldn't persuade him to come out again until next day. At supper that night, my father said, "You know, I don't believe that owl realizes he's an owl. I believe he thinks he's a human being. You'll have to educate him, Billy." It wasn't quite as bad as that. Wool eventually did learn to fly pretty well, but he never seemed to like flying or to trust it. He still preferred to walk wherever he was going. Weeps never learned to fly at all. I tried to teach him how by throwing him off the garage roof, but he wouldn't try. He would just shut his eyes, give a hopeless kind of moan, and fall like a rock without even opening his wings. Weeps didn't believe he could fly, and that was that. And that's just a cool picture of an owl roosting or sitting. All right, here's your research question for today. Do owls have feelings? Interesting question. And what kind of feelings can birds, animals, and particularly birds have? So you can look up any type of animal, any type of bird. And if you can, in the comment section, make a list of some animals and birds that do have feelings. You are not allowed to put dog or pets, any kind of pets like cat or dog. We're talking about wild animals. And once you put the names of some animals, I want you to put some of the names of the feelings they might have. So do they feel happy? Do they feel sad? Do they feel anger? Do they feel jealous? What kind of feelings do they have? Okay, and that's your research question for today.